Hey everybody, I'm Angela Walters. Welcome to this week's live chat. I sure did miss you all last week when I was in warm San Diego. It was a great time at the Thimble Therapy Retreat, but I'm glad to be back. And I was so hoping I would get to show you my brand new rulers because they are in production, they're produced, they're shipping to the distributor, so I hopefully will be able to talk to you about them next week or in the week after. But I did bring some like quilting samples to show you, so even though I can't show you the ruler, I'll kind of show you what they do. But I'm also going to give you tips on how to use the machine quilting rulers that you already have. Before we get to that, I have a couple of announcements, updates, and then we'll get right to the good stuff. And don't forget, if you're watching this live, Jessica is sitting over here monitoring the chat, so you can type out your questions and she'll give them to me at the end so I can answer them for you. Or if you're not watching this live, no worries, because you can always catch it on my YouTube channel. You can leave that in the comments. So be sure to do that because I want to make sure that you have everything you need to be successful with what we're talking about. So first of all, let's talk about the quilt walk. I kind of have been talking about this a little bit. If you are around the Kansas City area in Liberty, Missouri, where our quilt shop is located, in June we have a big outdoor event. It's kind of like an outdoor quilting show and tell where you wander through the local shops and pick up parts of a quilt pattern that I designed especially for that. So really fun. And I announced 2 weeks ago that Tula Pink is going to be our featured guest. So I hadn't even put it on the website or anything, but I am so excited. So what does that mean? That means Tula Pink will be here at the Quilt Walk doing a couple different events. So if you have been wanting to see Tula, to meet her, this is the best chance because she doesn't travel and teach as much anymore. So first of all, our featured guest will be doing an English paper piecing demo from 11 to 12. And she'll just kind of be showing you how she likes to do English paper piecing, her technique. I'm not sure what all voodoo is that she does, but I do know she produces those quilts pretty freaking fast. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see that kind of rolling demo. Then she's also going to do a meet and greet and book signing. So if you happen to be coming through the area, you can stop by and get your book signed by her or her patterns or whatever you want. And we'll have somebody taking pictures. It'll be a great time. And then also the whole time of Quilt Walk, we'll have an exhibit of her quilts. And these are going to be fun quilts since she's only about an hour from here. They're going to be quilts that maybe you haven't seen before. Maybe stuff that's brand new or stuff from back in the day that we used to work on together. I don't know exactly what she's going to do, but I know it's going to be amazing whatever it is. Now, if you're thinking, where do I get my tickets? You don't have to get a ticket. It's all free. Just show up at the shop first thing in the morning. We'll give you the map with all the locations and you can check that out. So again, I know not everybody lives in the Kansas City area or is able to drive through here on June 18th, but if you happen to be, you'll want to stop here. And just a little note, just to throw it out there, we're only 45 minutes from Missouri Star Quilt Company. So if you're already going to go see Jenny, you might as well just stop and visit us along the way. So really excited about that. But I know that, maybe we're here to talk about rulers, so we'll do that. Have you ever purchased a machine quilting ruler only to get it home and realize you don't really know how to use it? Or maybe you have rulers laying around and you're thinking, how do I create designs with these? Well, I realized as I was quilting the sample for my brand new rulers that I follow a lot of the same tips, a lot of the same steps, no matter the ruler, and that's kind of how I come up with the different design variations. So any rulers that you have, you'll be able to use these to kind of give you a jumping off point to create your designs. Now, to show you how they work, I'm actually going to be using some drawing circles. These handy things are pretty amazing. If you think about your machine quilting ruler, there's about 1/4 of an inch between the needle and the edge of your foot. So if you were going to sit down with some paper and draw out some design ideas, they're not always going to work quite right because you won't have that 1/4 inch. Well, these cute little drawing circles will approximate that 1/4 inch for you so that you can play around with your rulers at the table with your pen and paper, which is what I'm going to do here, instead of getting your fabric and worrying about messing it up. Because, if you don't like it, you just throw the piece of paper aside. So I'm going to be using these drawing circles to show you some of these techniques, and I also have quilting samples to show you. So hopefully you find this very helpful with your machine quilting rulers. So let's go to our little show and tell. First, I'm not supposed to be showing the rulers, so I'm not, but I thought I would show the sample of all the different designs I made with some of my new rulers. So this is one of them. I wish I could show you the ruler maybe next week. And then the second one is going to be a little bit cheery, happy, curvy, little florally. So when I have a new ruler coming out or I get a brand new ruler, I like to load a piece of fabric and quilt as many different designs with that ruler as I can think of. Then when I'm done, I just cut out the pieces that look good so that I now have like a design library to refer to. So if you are feeling brave, this is a great way to get comfortable using your rulers as well as coming up with designs that you can actually use on your quilts. So let me put those aside. When it comes to the steps that we're going to be following to create your designs, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be flipping your ruler. Now, I never said these were, super complex techniques. That wouldn't be any fun, right? Flipping your ruler or creating mirror images is going to take the shape that you can create and expand it to a slightly different look. This is a great way to get comfortable working with both sides of your foot, of your machine, but also to create secondary effects. This is so important. If you look at your ruler and it makes just a wavy line, that's great. But when you can start seeing multiple wavy lines used in different ways, that's when the wow factor kind of comes out. So in this sample, which I love to show for this example, I have used a wavy line ruler to create my wavy lines. So I just quilted one direction, and the next one was mirror imaged or flipped on itself. And that's kind of creating my bigger and narrower areas so that I can then come in and fill it in with more designs. Now in this example, I have used different free motion fillers because I like to use both together, but you can also keep repeating to do the same thing. So let's see what this kind of looks like in real life. So I'm going to be using my Chevy ruler just because it's what I have handy, but again, this is going to work with any ruler that you have. And the shape that I'm going to be working with is this kind of curvy plateau kind of look. And I got my little drawing circle, so it's going to help me approximate my shape. And notice my starting point is here, and I get this shape if I quilt along it. Pretty straightforward, right? All that means is if I want to quilt my next row, I'm going to rotate my ruler. Pretty easy, right? Using the same starting point. I'm using that same starting point as my guide, and then I'm going to quilt my next line so that it's opposite. Now, to do this, that means I'm going to need to be comfortable working with both sides of my foot. So let me go ahead and do this. On a sewing machine, that's not so much of a problem, right? Maybe I can put it on one side or the other. Sometimes on a long arm, I have trouble holding it one direction. So if the idea of flipping it around seems tricky, there's actually a little hack that you can use. If your ruler has a repeat, that means where the starting points are going to be the same point, it's going to kind of repeat and continue on. You can use that halfway mark as a guide. Not sure what I mean? Let me show you because it's pretty fun. Let's go back to that first line, right? I've quilted my first design. Now I want my second one to be a mirror image, but I don't want to flip my ruler over for whatever reason. All that means is instead of starting at the start point, this one will start at the middle point. I'll use my middle point, quilt till I get to my edge, and then repeat. And that's going to give me my mirror image. So much fun and so great that you can take a technique or design and use it to your skill level or your preferences. So mirror imaging, lots of fun. That's usually the first place I start because I want to see what kind of secondary patterns it's going to make. And whether I'm using Elvira, which is like a wavy kind of ruler, or maybe even just an arc ruler, you're still going to see some cool effects there. So give that a shot. I think you'll think it's pretty cool. Now let's talk about shifting. So number two, or tip number two, is shifting the ruler. This is something that seems a little weird, and it might seem weird when I tell you, but once you try it, you're going to see it's kind of cool. So in this example here, I have my wavy lines, and I quilted these with my Elvira ruler. And all I did is after I quilted one row, I'd make an echo line, except I'm going to shift the ruler a little bit. And the amount I shift it and the direction I shift it is all up to me, but that's going to create some different designs. I'm going to show you how with my drawing circles here in just a second. But I don't have to be regular with the shiftiness of my ruler. I can make it very irregular if I want them to look like they're overlapped. So how does that work, or how do we use that to our benefit? Well, I'm so glad you asked. So let's pretend I'm working with Elvira just because I have that one out too. And I'm going to quilt my first section. And this is just going to be, I'm not going to repeat it. I'm just going to do that first one. Here's my starting point along my edge. Now what this means, this is my starting point. When I want to quilt my next one, I'm going to shift it down for my echo, right? Maybe I want to make a 1/4 inch echo. And this is also, again, where this little drawing circle comes in handy. And this is where my starting point would be, just right here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift it over a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, whatever you feel like. And that's why kind of auditioning these designs on paper is really handy, because you can quickly see what you think about it. But you're still going to use that same starting point and then quilt along the ruler. The less shiftiness you have will create just a subtle kind of closer and further apart, which is really cool. Or if you want to make it more dramatic, then you can do it some more. So I was kind of shifted over here, so I'm going to go down and then continue over again. Now, if your ruler has certain reference lines you can use as a guide, that might be handy. Or if it doesn't, and you want to make sure that you get, that proper placement, you can use a little bit of washi tape to mark out some reference lines, or you can even get a dry erase marker to kind of put on there. So again, shifting it over is going to kind of create that subtle effect where it starts getting closer and further apart. The trick is going to be remembering where your starting point is and always shifting it the same way, unless you don't want to. But shifting it the same way is going to create that different look. Now, when you're shifting your ruler, you don't have to shift it over. You can actually shift it up. I know, now it's getting a little crazy, right? Crazy times with the quilting. Let's go back to our Chevy shape. Let's say I like this shape. Instead of quilting the whole thing, maybe I only quilt to the half. I mean, you paid for the whole ruler, but you don't have to use the whole thing. And then instead of continuing on, I'm going to go ahead and shift back to the starting point and then repeat. And that's going to give me that kind of stair-step look. So this is really fun because I'm creating a completely different shape even though I have this one to work with. So play around with how you shift it, whether you're repositioning the ruler, a full half bit or just a little bit, but remember what you did. Now, that's the trickiest part as you're practicing your drawings or you are quilting on a sample. Go ahead and write on there what you did so that if you come back to it later, you can remember what it is you want to do. All right, so when it comes to shifting, I have another sample over here. One second. Let's see what this looks like again in kind of action. So think about border designs, right? If we repeat a shape over and over again, we can vary that spacing or shift it over a certain amount to create different effects. So let's check out this shape. One of these days, when I can announce my new ruler, you'll see how that happens. But I just quilted along and then I shifted over. So I just kind of traveled to my next spot. So instead of shifting the ruler, I'm actually moving my needle and then quilting my next piece. Now, I kind of figured out exactly how many inches I need to go so that they kind of touch up next to each other, but I can shrink that down if I want them to overlap a little bit. Maybe I want some denser quilting. Maybe I want them to overlap and create almost a secondary effect. And so playing around with that placement will really help you. Or if you're like trying to get this quilt done and it's taking forever, you can make it really far apart. It makes it a little bit easier there. All right, number 3. See, I love my numbers. It's like I could pretend like I'm a teacher. Number 3, stacking your designs. Now, this is where we see clamshells come into play. Clamshells are great because they're just such a classic design. And normally with clamshells, they're quilted with a half circle shaped like the Shelley ruler. But what's fun about it is I kind of get that stacked look and it lets you fill up a bigger area quicker. So this is more for when I'm dealing with larger areas or backgrounds. But when you're stacking them on top of each other, you don't have to stick with your traditional curve or half curve. You can play around with different shapes. Anything can stack, right? As long as we can repeat that shape, we can stack on top of each other. Here I've used I used Archie to make a little bit of a pointy look, slightly different. I could use my shorty ruler and stack those on top of each other. It's still really, really fun. I have an example here that I can't show you the ruler, but I can show you the sample where I've taken a shape that's just this kind of curve, this little puff. And I'll tell you a little secret, it's not the whole ruler. I'm just stacking part of it. Again, using the same consistent reference lines or knowing where you're going to repeat that is going to create the look that you want. So basically I'm quilting a row and stacking my next one on top of it and continuing on. So stacking the design and seeing what kind of effects you can come out with is a really fun way to see those secondary patterns come out. And if you're like, I need something more difficult than that. No, it's not difficult, but maybe you want something more dense. You can do something like orange peels. Now, if we think about how we create clamshells, a clamshell is just a couple of circles. Well, the next row is just flipped over. We already saw that, right? Flipped over, and then it shifted halfway. So here's my arc. So here's one, there's a second. It's mirror image, it's just shifted over. So you can add even more to those clamshells if it's too dense or too like not quilted enough for you. Or if you're not loving how it turns out, add some more of these lines until it all looks good. Trust me, it's gonna do that. It's gonna give it a nice overall texture. All right, fourth, we're gonna talk about shortening or lengthening your ruler. Now this is something I talk about in the ruler or machine quilting with rulers free motion challenge. This is where you take your rulers and you make them fit the spaces that you have, right? It's great if you have a shorty ruler that can quilt to this kind of arced curved shape, but maybe I need it to be narrower. How do I make that happen? This is where we're gonna use reference lines as our guide. Get that light out of there. So let's say I wanna quilt this shape, but I don't want it to be quite as wide for whatever reason. I'm gonna do some more shifting. I'm going to quilt along, stopping at any point I want. I'm gonna try to use a reference point, whether that's on the ruler or I have kind of marked it on my ruler, because I wanna probably be able to do this again. And then I'm gonna shift the ruler over to another reference line, so maybe this one right here, and then continue on. Kind of get that a little darker. And that's gonna take that ruler and just kind of make it a little bit more narrow. And this is something that you can do with any ruler, arcs especially. So if you're working with an arc ruler, you can kind of go to one reference line and then shift it over and do the next. Because always the arcs are great, but if we want to put them in a block, maybe the block isn't quite the right size. And you can make this as extreme or as variable as you want. So put my little drawing circle, and maybe I shift my ruler down too. Maybe I want to make them narrower and less tall, shorter. I can go just to that reference line and shift it over and get that different shape. And this is where, again, we start to see the fun secondary patterns come out. Now, I hate to say fun all the time, but it is fun. That's where you get to create some different effects with the rulers that you already have. Not that I want you to not go out and buy more rulers, but if you're not using the ones you have, this is where we get to play with those. All right, the next one, echo. I mean, come on, you knew I was gonna say that. Echoing is your best quilting friend. Echoing is just quilting the same shape over and over again, but you can kind of create different effects within your echoing. So if we look at this guy, let me flip it over. This one is a little bit more complex or contrasting. Here's my Elvira ruler, so I quilted it, but I've also echoed it, and then I mirror imaged it and echoed that. If you're like, I don't know, that's when you start playing with your rulers and seeing what happens when you mix these together. But echoing it is gonna help build it up, especially if you like that shape. It's also gonna help you kind of get an idea of what that design looks like repeated over an area. So echoing, whether you use consistent spacing, like here I've got 1/4 inch spacing, or you can even vary that spacing to create different effects, especially if like you start real narrow and you wanna make them bigger because you wanna get this quilt finished. You can keep your echoing, again, I combine that with mirror imaging, but you can also just straight up echo your shape. The most important thing here is remembering your starting point. If I want to make consistent echoes, my starting point should always be the same on the ruler for each row. Now, once you get more comfortable using your ruler, you might be able to quilt over, then shift it down and come back here. But if you always remember where you start on the ruler, you can come to your, quilt your first row, come back, start at the same point, and repeat. Now, here's the thing though, when you're echoing, it's not always gonna work out perfectly. It's gonna shift, you're gonna move, maybe you're trying to quilt one-handed and have a drink of your quilting juice at the same time. So if you find that they're really getting not quite perfect echoes, go ahead and just make them variable on purpose. Don't stick with it. Or a little thing I like to do is to kind of add some echoes in the opposite direction. This is great because if you throw more lines around it, you're not gonna see the individual lines anymore. So this is the same idea, wavy lines in one direction, wavy lines on the other direction, creating that kind of wavy crosshatch. Now what's so fun, and the reason I use this sample, is our eyes are very easily tricked. You might be thinking, no, my eyes are not tricked, you can't trick me. These two waves, the wave going this way and the wave going that way, are two different waves. This one is more drastic, this one's a little bit more subtle, but since they overlap, it's really hard to tell. And if you can't really tell they're different waves, then who's to say that you're gonna be able to tell if there's a mistake? So that's a great kind of idea there. Now the last little tip I have for you, rotate your ruler. Especially if you have a ruler that's made for, like, oh, it's for a border. Nah, use it as a motif. Rotating your ruler in a lot of different directions will give you an all-over design or even a motif, and it's a really fun way to use that ruler. Plus, what seems to happen when we're learning how to quilt something is we tend to only be comfortable quilting in one direction, one side, and this is going to force you to get comfortable using your ruler from all sides of your foot, which is really going to be important to making sure you're successful with your design. This particular design is just the same shape, we've kind of seen this already, just rotated in all different directions and filling in that area as consistently as possible. So you can be very regular about your rotation and create a motif, which I'll show you here in a second, or you can just say, heck, I'm going to go in all different directions and make sure I fill in the whole thing. It's going to make it, again, a lot of fun. And then a little motif for you here, where I've taken that shape, see if I can get it where you can see it, there we go. I've taken that shape and I have rotated in all different directions. So again, even if it's for a border, even if it's something for like specialty, try rotating it around a fixed point or stacking them on top of each other to create those different effects. And the next one, real quick, I'll show you, and then I'll answer your questions if you have any. You can combine your rulers, again, use your rotating idea. This one I wasn't super happy with, but I kept it on here. Play around with the different shapes you have, the narrower and the wider. That's when you're going to see these really cool effects come out. So as you're going and you're trying these different techniques, you can also combine them together. So try rotating and echoing. I know, like mind-blowing, right? Or try overlapping them, but also shifting them over. You're going to see that's where these different effects are going to come out. And again, loading a piece of fabric or making a quilt sandwich and trying it, great idea. Or if you just want to come up with some design ideas, getting some drawing circles, using good old pen and paper will really help you become more proficient with those particular rulers. All right, so let me switch out of here. Any questions? The thing about machine quilting with rulers, it's one of those techniques that will grow with you no matter where you are on your skill level. So quilting with rulers is great for beginner machine quilters or even machine quilters that know how to cover their mistakes like me. Do I have a video on how to square up a quilt for first-time quilters? I don't, but that would be a great idea, especially after you've quilted it, because when you've quilted your quilt, it's not always going to lay perfectly flat. So maybe I'll do that in a live chat. I'll talk about blocking your quilt and how to square it. Because when you take your quilt top and you machine quilt it, the goal is that when you're done, it is square and flat. Sometimes it doesn't happen though, and you have to creatively square it and flatten it. Do I set up some main line that I'm maintaining with keep my lines straight? So some kind of reference lines or guidelines. Yes. And I wonder, hold on, let me pull this up real quick. I don't know if you'll be able to see them because I hadn't erased them yet, but for these, I definitely did. Well, no, you can't really see them. I use my blue water-soluble marker, and I mark reference lines, especially in the beginning when you're getting comfortable with it, and especially if I'm working on a piece of just solid fabric because there's no seams to use as guides, there's nothing. I'm just kind of out here in space. But if you have a quilt with seams, you can use those as your reference lines or kind of your guidelines. Let me tell you, if you have a strip quilt laying around, that is the perfect one to practice rulers because you have all these seams that can be your perfect little guides. So yes, use reference lines to help keep your design on track. Do I sell handy quilter machines in the Bowling Green area? Well, it just so happens we sell machines all over the US, even Alaska and Hawaii. So we have owners there. So if you have questions about handy quilter machines, you can email machines@quiltingismytherapy.com, and I'll put a link to that in the description box. Watching people go on their long arming journey is one of the funnest things I get to do. Seeing them get their machine and helping them love their long arm as much as I love mine. And speaking of, long arming sewing machines, you can use those rulers that we talked about on any machine. So whether you are quilting on a stand-up machine or a sit-down, you can do all those techniques we've talked about for your rulers to create those different effects. Okay, I'm going to be back next Thursday, but we might have a little surprise. I may be out of my studio and on location somewhere else, somewhere close to here, about 45 minutes away. So it'll be a little bit different next week, a little bit more like behind the scenes, what's Angela doing now, and then hopefully the week after that, I'll get to finally show you my brand new rulers. So I hope to see you at one of those live chats. I hope you all have a great weekend and stay safe, everybody. Happy quilting.